Hello and welcome to this construction news webinar. My name is Lem Bingley and I'm the editor of Construction News. Today we'll be looking at ways to get the most out of frameworks, which I know is a topic of great interest across the industry. Frameworks have become widespread in use, but there are ongoing debates about the efficiency of the whole framework approach and how best to grasp the opportunities that they present. Now, I'm not sure if anyone will be joining us today who doesn't actually know what a framework is, but in case, I'll try to provide a quick explanation. A framework is a competitive process run in advance of the actual contracts, and that initial process determines who can and can't bid for the eventual work. A framework typically runs for a fixed period of time, and there's usually a pretty good idea of the value of the work due to be placed through the framework from the outset. They may be divided up by the size of contracts and by geographical spread. So contractors who are successful in winning places don't usually get to bid for all of the subsequent lots as they come up within the framework. Now, there are arguments about whether this approach creates more effective competition by pre-qualifying suitable bidders, or whether it stifles competition by shutting out new entrants. Well, that's a great debate, but one thing we can rely on, frameworks are not going away. So given that fact, what can be done to get the most out of them, especially for contractors, and especially for small contractors? And are there ways to grasp all of the upsides and minimize the downsides? Now, that's what we are here to discuss today. And I should say a word of thanks to our sponsor, OPPORTUNI, for supporting this webinar. A panel of experts will be joining me in a moment to discuss these topics. We are scheduled to run for about an hour, and we'll be taking questions from the audience via the Q&A function. So please don't hold back. Do post your questions as soon as they occur to you, and we'll do our best to cover as many questions as we can. So if our panelists could all switch on their cameras and unmute now, I'm delighted to be joined by Rob Byrnes, Head of Frameworks at Vinci Construction, Jason Stapley, Managing Director at Pagabo, Martin Traynor, Small Business Crown Representative at the Cabinet Office, John Welch, Deputy Director for Construction at the Crown Commercial Service, and Tim Ward, CEO and co-founder of OPPORTUNI. Now I'm going to ask each of them to introduce themselves and also to say a little bit about the topic of the day. Rob, would you mind going first?
Thanks, Lem, and thanks for the invite today onto the panel. I'm hoping we'll have a really good, engaging discussion. So yeah, I'm Rob Byrnes, Head of Frameworks at Vinci Construction. Predominantly focused around the building aspect of the built environment, but take in other parts of the company, including our civils bit, Taylor Woodrow and Vinci FM. I oversee our entire portfolio of frameworks. They're predominantly public sector focused, but more and more we're seeing private clients look to frameworks as a way to enhance governance around their procurement processes, which I think is a good progressive move for the industry. I work across the life cycle of frameworks, so engaging with providers. You know, I'm on CCS and Pagabo. You'll hear from John and Jason later. Through to and how they're going to bring things to market, through to bidding them, then working with our teams to secure projects on them and making sure they're effectively managed. So hopefully that'll aid some of our discussions today. We're part of a wider Vinci group. It's a bit of a mammoth beast, 43 billion euro turnover last year. That was a bit reduced from the year before. We deliver about £2 billion through the Vinci companies in the UK. So we can sort of, you know, anything you can think of we're involved with, from HS2 through to being a significant provider for the NHS. So yeah, looking forward to the discussion today.
Thanks very much, Rob. Jason, would you mind going next?
Yeah, thanks, Rob. Morning, everyone. I'm Jason Stapley. I'm Managing Director of Pagabo. So I suppose my background is I spent 24 years in the public sector, predominantly in both procurement and finance. I'm an MSIPS practitioner. I've been qualified for just over 19 years now. And Pagabo are the managing agent for a number of public sector frameworks across the UK. We currently have £5.2 billion worth of projects currently being delivered on site at the moment. We have £1 billion worth in procurement going through at the moment, and approximately 1.4 billion of pipeline waiting to come through. And we work with over 300 public sector clients, which also include a number of central government departments as well. For example, HMRC. That's me. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jason. Martin, if you'd like to go next.
Good morning, everyone. Martin Traynor, and I have this very grand title of the Small Business Crown Representative. I always say it's not a particularly powerful position, but it always gets me a good table in a restaurant. Now, my role in central government is twofold. One is to work with government departments to try and make our procurement policies, practices, and procedures simpler for SMEs to navigate. But I'm also here to engage with the wider business community to encourage them to think about pitching for government contracts. But just to put this into the policy context, central government spends something in the region of 60 billion a year on goods and services. And it's the government's aspiration that for every £3 we spend, we want £1 spent with SMEs, either directly or indirectly. But if you take the wider public sector, we spend something in the region of 292 billion a year on goods and services. That's actually 14% of GDP. So there are huge opportunities out there for SMEs to engage with us. But again, if you look at our capital program over the next 5 years, which of course we're referring to as Building Back Better, you're talking about 660 billion over that 5-year period. So there's a huge opportunity here for the construction industry. So I look forward to engaging with people today.
Thanks, Martin. That really does put things in perspective. John, would you like to go next?
Of course, yeah. Thanks, Lem. Good morning, everybody. So I'm John Welch, Deputy Director of Construction at Crown Commercial Service. So my background, I'm a quantity surveyor by trade, so I'm a fellow of the RICS and have extensive procurement and contract management experience in the construction industry, working right across the tiers, so from SMEs to main contractors to consultants to clients, across multiple different sectors as well. So whether that's building, civil engineering, utilities, petrochem, nuclear. So offer hopefully a fair bit of experience and insight in this particular topic. And my role at Crown Commercial Service, we are the UK's largest procurement organisation, the procurement agent of the Cabinet Office. And we, as Pagabo was saying there, we deal with 300 plus public sector clients and multiple suppliers as well in an attempt to try and improve the construction industry. So we have different contracts, different construction frameworks or agreements, but ultimately we want to try and utilise those to help improve the industry and make it more sustainable and maintain it as we try and recover from COVID. So yeah, I look forward to the discussion today. Thank you.
Thanks, John. And finally, Tim.
Morning, Lem. Thank you very much for the introduction. So my name is Tim Ward. I'm CEO and co-founder of OPPORTUNI. We are a software-based solution. We match businesses with contract opportunities they can actually win. So think Tinder for tendering. And then we match them with professional bid writers who can help them actually pursue those opportunities. Our mission is to find those great small and medium-sized businesses who should be winning contracts and make it easier for them to actually find them and win them. So over this last year, we've helped small and medium-sized businesses win over 600 million pounds worth of contracts, which we're incredibly proud of, but it's just a start. But frameworks, we feel, play a really big part of this because we think it's a great stepping stone into the world of public sector contracts.
Thanks very much, Tim. Well, as I said in my introduction, we're keen to get questions from our audience, but we're going to start with prepared discussion, or rather questions that I prepared and have up my sleeve. I'm going to start, Jason, with you. From your perspective as at Pagabo as a provider of frameworks, we promised to give our audience some tips about how to get the best out of frameworks. But from your perspective as a framework provider, what do you think is the most important factor for contractors to get the best out of them? What's your view?
I suppose one of the main pitfalls is to not just sit there and do nothing, understand how the framework operates, engage with the framework managers to really start to understand the nuances and how organizations can actually get and utilize and get a competitive advantage, really. Really understand how the framework's going to operate and win work. I suppose being on a framework agreement does open a number of doors and many possibilities where both organisations will get opportunities to tender, but also they can bring their own clients as well to the framework agreement and say, look, there is an easier way that you can win business through a framework agreement. You don't have to go out to tender yourself. You don't have to engage with all that risk. You don't have to try and get organisations to actually tender for work now, which is one of the big problems that we have in the industry. Organisations actually tendering for the work themselves, and it's understanding that, really. So I suppose in a nutshell is, don't just sit there. When you're on a framework agreement, really engage with the process, understand it completely, and then try and engage with it and market yourselves, really, once you're on that framework agreement.
Because Jason, there's that two-stage process, effectively, isn't it? You've got to win a place on the framework, and then within the framework, you've got to win those mini competitions or contests that actually allocate the lots. And I guess, is there a danger that people think, well, once I'm in the framework, that's the hard work done, and that they don't focus enough on the contest that within the framework? Is that a risk?
I think it is, yeah. And again, with I suppose every further competition, every mini competition that organisations have to go through, there is some specific questions, and it's understanding exactly what the question's asking to win that bit. But you are reduced down to a minimum, or normally reduced down to a number which is quite manageable. We tend to stick to around 6 or 7, depending on the framework agreement. But again, we limited it down to that. So then there is competition, healthy competition for the organisations, but also means that they're not one of many out there as well. So it gives organisations that are actually on the framework agreement a chance. 1 in 6 chance is very good. We also have things like reserve organisations on the framework as well. They're actually appointed correctly through the XOG process, whereby the reserves also can get the chance as well, where we don't get the optimum number of organisations tendering for the work during that further competition period. So we can actually bring in those as well. So that increases our chances and the client actually getting somebody to deliver the procurement project for them.
Thanks, Jason. Rob, from your perspective at Vinci, obviously you're bidding for work through its frameworks. What sort of lessons have you learned from your approach about perhaps pitfalls to avoid or mistakes that could be avoided?
Certainly one of the things that we've all talked about before is answer the question that you've been asked. And what comes from or the start of that process, I think, is starting to engage in some of these bigger questions that the industry and our clients are starting to face. And we're certainly seeing that as a theme right across the questions that are getting asked. So, social value, modern methods of construction, carbon, diversity, alliancing, all these topics are becoming more and more prevalent, and the pace of change and the pace that we're being asked to change by our clients is just accelerating all the time. So even if you think that they're not, you can't make that big a change depending on what size of an organization you are, I think just trying to understand those topics, because they are the topics that are facing the public sector. How are they going to decarbonize their estate? How are they going to increase social value when they spend their money? They're all things that we can play a part in influencing. So I'd certainly advocate getting involved in those and And replicating what Jason said, be an active member of these things. You know, don't sit back, get involved, see what you can do. You know, I'm on focus groups, I'm on panels that sit within frameworks to understand what we can do, because there's an awful lot can be leveraged with those groups that sit within frameworks. And we're all there trying to not just win work, but, you know, make the industry better, improve what we do. Because if we don't improve, you know, other people will overtake us.
That's an interesting point you make there about answering the question. I guess there's a temptation for people to, you know, use the same sort of answers, to cut and paste approach, to try and think that, well, what we've got to offer is always the same, so therefore we should just talk about what we can offer and not really look at what the framework is trying to achieve. Is that okay?
Yeah, you know, each framework provider, they've got their own requirements, they've got specific requirements. So even though, you know, there's a number of frameworks that could be national or regionally based, the requirements are all different. They're trying to attract clients in a different way. They're trying to put a value proposition out towards their clients, and that's what you're trying to meet. So yeah, make sure that you know, you can have a sort of standard service offering, but really try and make it specific when you get to trying to get on the frameworks.
Yeah, thanks very much, Rob. Tim, from your perspective, opportunity, have you got advice you can give? What do good and bad frameworks look like? What advice would you give from your perspective?
Yeah, I think it's about understanding your own capabilities. It's very easy to see a huge framework and go, yeah, I want to be part of that, but you got to look at the size of your business, your past experience. The whole purpose of the procurement exercise is to minimize the risk in spending the money. And if you're a £5 million turnover contractor and you're going for a £20 million piece of work, it's just not achievable. Well, it's achievable, but it's going to be a huge risk to the procurement department, and chances are someone's going to say no somewhere along the line. So try and pick carefully what it is you're going for. If you get on to a framework and you deliver in smaller pieces of work, that can easily build up to a significant piece of work, which then gives you the grounding to go for that bigger piece of work next time. So just, you be ambitious with it, but be realistic as well. And I think the same thing is coming through again here, and which is answer the questions. The most common thing is we talk to procurement people all the time and they say they didn't answer the questions. And that's because every company you talk to will have something they want to tell the organization. They'll read about a tender and they'll go, we must tell them about this, 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 and this. But if they're not asking about that, then you're not going to score points for that. And you're wasting your time, you're wasting their time. And ultimately, the company that wins the contract is the best tender. It's not the best company, it's the best put together tender, which actually answers the questions. And the whole purpose of the process is to demonstrate value for money. If you're answering a different question, how are they supposed to compare that with a question from someone else on a level playing field? So that would be my guidance. Make sure you're looking at the right size opportunity and make sure you're working to the questions, to the specification.
Thanks very much, Tim. John, I guess you look at these questions from the other end of the telescope as at the Crown Commercial Service. I mean, what do you look for from those people who are bidding and trying to secure work through the frameworks? What sets a good one apart from a bad one?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I think a lot of the points have been covered by the previous panel members there. But for me, behaviour and leadership is key. So suppliers involved have to want to be part of building back better. So I recommend working in that collaborative way, in that alliance fashion, which can be a shift change to some in the industry at the moment, up and down the supply chain. But take the leap, be brave, be competitive and collaborative, and jointly problems can start to be solved, and then a sustainable industry can then start to be secured as well. So we've established in all of our construction agreements the use of FAC1, which is an alliance form of contract. And as my role as NEC Users Group Chair, amongst other things, I'm trying to help raise awareness of collaborative procurement and how best to achieve this as well. We may touch upon the construction playbook in a bit, but there's the mandation around early supply chain involvement, which involves multiple tiers, but the opportunity there to start influencing how things come to market, because the experts are involved at an early stage, will help deliver the right requirements and achieve the right outcomes for the departments looking to procure. we know suppliers are going to need to start to consider and demonstrate how they're going to deliver against carbon net zero targets and support social value and obviously health and safety as well, but also tackling modern slavery, a key issue in our industry, but needs to be addressed for the right reasons. But really importantly, none of what I've talked about there or what we've talked about as a panel so far should come at the expense of health and safety. So the industry we know has come a huge way since the introduction of the CDM regs, but we can always do more, and it's always pleasing to see positive health and safety approaches and records in bids that come through. Excuse me, and a huge focus on raising the awareness of mental health as well. So encouraging people to talk and share more, but openly share ideas through their bid submissions on what they're doing for the well-being of us as people, of their own people, and of course their families as well.
John, you raised the issue there of some of those progressive issues, things like net zero, and a lot of firms perhaps will have moved their stance on net zero quite dramatically just in the last year or so. But we have frameworks that might run for 4 years or what have you. How do those the pace of those changes fit together from your perspective?
So we have the procurement policy notes that get published from Cabinet Office. One of the recent ones is on achieving carbon net zero and the action plans that bidders need to now start to produce when submitting bids greater than 5 million, I think it is. So as a framework operator and owner, I need to take that PPM and embed that within our framework. But I start to do that through the focus groups. Because of the alliance way we've established things, we've introduced focus groups, which allows a tripartite conversation, if you like, between ourselves, customers and suppliers in trying to identify problems and help mitigate issues or deliver against these problems jointly, so in a collaborative way. And we do have a focus group on carbon net zero. So it's working with those members of that group in trying to develop evidence or suggestions on how suppliers can work together to help deliver the requirements of the PPN and what the procurement or the call-off may be that comes to market through our frameworks.
Thanks very much, John. Martin, turning to you, we've got about 200 people on the call, so questions have started to come in, and perhaps you can help me cover off one of them. The question asks, what advice would you give to a small business that's not currently active on any frameworks, but they are seeking to secure a position on a framework for the first time? So specifically from that small business perspective or the small and medium enterprise perspective, what advice would you give?
Okay, well, I think first of all, I would support very much what Tim said about the evaluation of which framework to go for. I think be realistic. What's the size of your business? What's your current turnover? And what can you actually deliver? But I think you've just got to remember about frameworks. They're actually the first stage of the process. And as I often say to small businesses that say, well, I'm on a framework, but I've not had any business. The reality actually is, yes, you can get yourself onto a framework, but as Jason said earlier on, you actually need to spend a bit of time promoting yourself to the framework managers. It's not just a case of putting yourself on a framework, it's actually being out there to say, I can do this, this is the sort of thing that I can do, etc., etc. So I think that's an important part of the process. And interestingly, just picking up on something Lee's put in the Q&A here about price being the big driver. Well, you probably see as when the legislation comes through next year, we're moving away from what is described as meat, which is the most economically advantageous tender, which of course drives price down. What we will be doing is replacing that with the most advantageous tender. Now, the basis of that is that sometimes something that we purchase might cost a bit more, but it actually might be a better fit with the public sector objectives. So that actually is going to be quite a significant change for the industry.
Well, thanks very much, Martin. I'm going to stick with audience questions, and I don't know if any of the other members of the panel would like to give any further advice for that question about how small businesses can best engage with frameworks. I mean, Jason, from your perspective as a framework operator, what do you see in terms of good and bad practice from the smaller suppliers?
Well, The way we put up the sort of whole of the UK is perhaps a little bit different to other providers. So we carve up the UK into very, very small regional areas at the very, very low end. So for example, we have a dynamic purchasing system for smaller organisations. So as I said, it could be something as small as being a joiner or a plumber, whereby the whole of the UK is divided up into 176 regional areas. And then we operate a DPS on that basis. And then going upper level, so the medium works framework agreement, that's available in 64 regional areas, for example. So the areas become larger, the amounts become larger, and that's operated on a framework basis. So that's how we sort of engage with SMEs and allow SMEs to participate and win work through the public sector, but also supporting them in other ways as well. So we always look to get organisations on there, particularly on framework agreements. We always evaluate SMEs against SMEs. So we always have reserved places for SMEs. So we're very, very particular on that now. Every single one of our frameworks, within those 6 or 7 places I mentioned earlier, we always reserve 2 places for SMEs and always evaluate SMEs against SMEs. So they're not, the big boys, the tier 1 contractors aren't then closing out the framework agreement. And we like that bit of localism as well within that. You know, we encourage the SME agenda all the way, and try and, where we can, work to that agenda really, just to encourage SME participation where we can.
Thanks very much, Jason. John, I can see you've got your virtual hand up.
Yes, Lem, thank you. It was hopefully building on what Martin said and what Jason's just talked about there, with regard to a couple of things. One of them, the DPSs. So Jason's right. The opportunity for SMEs who aren't currently on frameworks can access government work via DPSs, which is the dynamic purchasing systems. So we have them as well. For that reason, you know, we changed our strategy this year in our construction professional services category to introduce one. So we still have a framework, and SMEs can apply or could apply at the time of procurement to be on that. But at the same time, we've launched a DPS in parallel, recognising that certainly in wider public sector and local authority land, you know, they need and want access to local supply chain. So this gives SMEs the chance to apply to become members of the DPS for access to public sector clients that way. I think another point as well was around pre-qualification. So the introduction of the Common Assessment Standard, which was led by Build UK and Seeker tremendously well, I think chaired by Vinci actually as a group, a working group, did involve SMEs, so small organisations, trades, in the development of what is now a common set of questions. It's a build on what existed, which was PAS 91 or still is PAS 91. But the intention is to standardise and commonize, if you like, an approach to pre-qualification, so these things aren't having to be repeated far too often. And I think one of the biggest successes in that project was the introduction and the data sharing between the assessment bodies, the CHASs of this world, the construction lines and Achilles, which mean the suppliers who are members of each of those or one of those only has to do and pass that qualification once, which hopefully reduces the burden on SMEs or any suppliers in trying to pre-qualify for public sector work.
Thanks very much, John. Turning to another question here. Do we think we might have too many framework providers? Well, that's an interesting question. I think there are many hundreds of frameworks in operation. Rob, I could see that you had an immediate reaction to that statement. Do you have a view you'd like to share?
Yeah, you know, I've been to conferences and there's figures quoted from the hundreds to the tens of thousands. I think somebody said at one framework conference. I go back to what Tim said. Yes, there are lots of frameworks out there. I'm quite happy that there is diversity amongst the frameworks. They are meeting different needs, and clients have got different needs. So I think that's a good thing. But ultimately, I could take a tack of I'll just go for everything and I'll be on everything, and then I'm on every club, so I sort of cover my bases. But that's not the way that I operate, and I'd certainly, wouldn't advocate that. Going back to what Tim said, of understand your own capabilities, understand how you can match that to the frameworks, understand what the framework is actually trying to do, and the clients that they are trying to attract to their framework. Does that match the business goals that you've decided are for the business? And then I'll run a cost benefit analysis of, what does it take to get on the framework? What does it take to manage the framework while I'm there? What is the likelihood for returns via the framework? Are they getting traction with the market? And can I be successful on it? So there's lots of those questions and criteria that each organization needs to consider themselves. So yeah, I think we will probably see some consolidation. We're all waiting for the, John mentioned the playbook. One of the things that was mentioned in the playbook was the framework review that Professor David Mosey is carrying out. We're all waiting for the Constructing the Gold Standard report to come out. And I think that will guide where frameworks go in this sort of medium to long term. We've got the Transforming Public Procurement green paper that's out at the moment. We published the consultation on that. So I think there's lots of things that will shape the framework landscape, whether that will reduce them or whether that will make it easier for people to set up frameworks. I'm not quite sure yet, but it's a very interesting time for us all to understand how the landscape is going to transform.
Thanks, Rob. Tim, do you have a view on whether there are too many frameworks or perhaps ways in which to thin them out when you're looking for them? I don't know.
So from my point of view, in terms of encouraging more diversity in the delivery networks, I think more frameworks is a good thing. Because the alternative option is you have one large prime provider who's then in control of the full process, whereas that works well for the prime provider, but for the subcontractors and those further down the line can be particularly challenging. I mean, we've seen situations with Brilliant which were disastrous, whereas if you've got a framework and you've got much more flexibility, you can drive better value for money in terms of delivery of contracts because you're procuring each individual call off. And it makes them more accessible to a number of different companies rather than one company holding the big piece of work, taking a big slice off the top and basically ruling the full project. So for me, more frameworks is a good thing. And particularly, you can be anything from a man in a van right through to a huge multinational corporation, and there's a framework for you, whether it's the responsive repairs contract for a housing association or whether it's building a new road. There's something out there for everyone. By using frameworks, it makes things more accessible, from my opinion.
That touches, Tim, on one of the questions that we had here, which was whether there were really sort of frameworks for specialists, like diamond drilling was the example used, and I guess you're saying there are. So
I can't name one off the top of my head, but I'm sure someone out there has a framework for diamond drilling where they have a significant requirement.
Maybe we can find one. Yeah.
I know that there certainly is. There's things covering every aspect of construction which are needed, not on a consistent basis, but on a call-off basis. I mean, you don't need diamond drilling every single day on most projects, so there will be somewhere along the line. That's my mission for this afternoon. I'm going to go and find a diamond drilling framework.
Excellent. We can source that offline then. Excellent. John, I think you wanted to make a point.
Yes, thanks, Len. I think, I guess the short answer, in my opinion, is there's too many frameworks because there's, I think, over 4,000 as far as we're aware, if not more, which makes the choice quite difficult for both suppliers and for public sector buyers. But taking everybody's points, at a general level, there needs to be a good mix. There needs to be frameworks that are relevant and proportionate to what the requirements are that are actually being procured. So I agree with Tim there. There can't just be one as an example, because not one size fits all. We can't shoehorn requirements in. That's not the right thing to do. But to one of the points made before, I think it was Rob who talked about the framework review that's hopefully being published very soon, over the next week or two. One of the intents of that review was to ascertain how many frameworks there are and actually what value are they adding, and the results of the publication will hopefully be a bit of guidance to suppliers and departments on what a gold standard should look like, and therefore help choose or limit the choice of gold standard frameworks that are available, but also those that don't quite meet that, help them in develop what a gold standard should be in the short term to be able to bridge that gap. So at least that way, whenever departments are using these types of frameworks and suppliers are looking to bid for them, they'll know that they're delivering against government's policy, which is really, really important.
Thanks, John. Jason.
Yeah, sorry, just to, I suppose, add to John's comments. There are a number of good and bad framework providers out there. I see it, and the gold standard, I think, will do a very good job in bringing those into line and being able to deliver a good framework agreement, which is consistent, up to the regulations and inclusive, particularly around SMEs and what people are trying to develop there. And I suppose with regards to, are there too many framework agreements? I agree. There is over 4,000 framework agreements. That's across the board, though. In the construction industry, I'm not so sure. And the reason why I'm saying that is one of my frustrations originally was always trying to find a framework organisation to deliver procurement contracts in the public sector. And I always found it difficult for organisations, but not only to say there's a framework, go and use it, which is the sort of common question that we always got. It's helping those organisations that may only procure one school every 3 years, helping them through the framework agreement, holding the hand through the whole process. And that's one of the difficulties. There's not many organisations out there that will actually do that, help those organisations through that whole process. That the public sector, the small local authority that's buying one school every 3 years. So I suppose that's, to say, I think there's too many frameworks out there. I think they do have to come in line. I think organisations need to deliver a gold standard. I think they need to go over and above that, those framework providers, to deliver that gold standard to help organisations through this minefield. At the end of the day, the public sector organisations are not experts in doing this. And what we found is by training up people in our organisation to become procurement experts, but also contract experts as well. So majority of our guys will be SIPS qualified and also NEC4 practitioners, JCT practitioners, and we're also looking at the alliance contract as well at the moment. So yeah, that's what I'd just like to sort of add to that.
Thanks, Jason. Moving on to another question. The question is, how important is it to demonstrate compliance when you're within your field? Martin, perhaps you might be able to talk about this. Is it important, especially for those smaller organisations, to be members of accreditation bodies and things like that to get noticed on frameworks?
Well, I think first of all, it comes back to the earlier comment about making sure you actually answer the question, but not only answering the question, being able to demonstrate that you have the appropriate certification, and that actually is quite important. And you'd be surprised the number that come through that miss that point and then end up being disqualified from the process. But one of the things that we will be doing through something that's called Project Conclave, And what the concept behind Project Conclave is that you can enter a tendering process in central government from up to 70 different areas. But one of the challenges is if you were to go to the Department of Education, you'd fill out their PQQ. You would then go to the Department of Transport, and then you'd have to do it all over again. So the concept is that we will have a single point where you will put in your information. We call it tell us once. So you'll put the information in. Most tenders are 80% of the questions we ask are generic. So therefore, we've got the ability to be able to do that. So we will retain that information. And therefore, when you move from department to department, you would then tap in either your company's house number or your VAT number, and that generic information would then cascade down. But in doing this process, we're actually going to tidy up a lot of the questions that we asked, because when we set this up about 10 years ago, for instance, health and safety, which we were referring to earlier, we had a set of generic questions across all our PQQs. But over the years, we've now got sort of what I would describe as a bag of dolly mixtures at the moment, the number of different questions. So we will standardize that type of thing. So what we aim to do with Conclave is to have something that's generic and consistent.
Thanks, Martin. Tim.
Just a question on that, Martin, on the tell us once. Is that something that's only going to be used by central government procurement, or is that going to be rolled out so people like Practice and Delta Resourcing and things like that have to use that as well?
Well, Tim, we're working on the basis of rolling out this through central government. To be perfectly honest, that in itself is a challenge, because we have 17 different computer systems, very few talk to each other. So there is an element to getting the consistency across central government. But ultimately, we would like to see this adopted by local government and other contracting authorities. If we can get it right, then it would make absolute sense in the public sector.
Do you know roughly what the rollout timeframes are for that?
We're aiming to try and roll this out towards the back end of next year. That's the realistic time scale. We're conscious that we're taking something through Parliament at the moment, and that is likely to come into effect in 2023. So we want to try and get a little bit of consistency there.
Well, thanks both of you there. Moving on to another question. Well, several different questions have come up the same topic in different ways. Really, it's a question about how frameworks work in terms of early contractor involvement. Rob, perhaps you might be able to say a word about that. Maybe you've experienced good and bad practice in terms of early contractor involvement, about what stage in the project you're able to get involved when working through a framework. Do you have a comment?
Yeah, I'm a huge promoter of early contractor involvement, as it was sort of known. The playbook has changed the title to early supply chain involvement, which I think is even better. You know, taking up the points the guys have talked about, you know, it's incumbent on me as a tier one contractor to bring the supply chain and the SMEs on board, and that's something that we haven't really touched on, but through the common assessment standard, which we've adopted, that will, and you know, lots of SMEs work for the tier ones. You know, over 75% of my business goes through SMEs in my supply chain. And using the common assessment standard will get people ready for entering the public sector world and trying to bid for projects through that. So it's a really good way of you know, starting to get to know how the public sector works. But in terms of early supply chain involvement, yeah, I've seen some brilliant versions of it. We work on the Procure 22 healthcare framework as a joint venture called AHP, and you know, you're in right at the start of that. It's a quality-based assessment process to get in there, and we bring in supply chain, we bring in design teams. And right from the start, the client is working with us, and we're there right at the start. You know, I think as an organ or as an industry, we need to move away from, you know, appointing the contractor as the last person in the chain. It just, to me, doesn't seem the right thing to do. You know, we've got fantastic collaborative models out there. The guys have talked about alliancing. You know, that has to be the way forward in terms of how this industry is going to deal with the challenges of the capacity to deliver the spend that Martin's talked about. You know, there's huge challenges around that. We've got huge issues around people leaving the industry through the pandemic, Brexit, material shortages in place. There's huge challenges out there. And if we don't come together and don't bring the people around the table as early as possible to try and solve those risks, mitigate the risks, and find a better way of doing things, I think we're not going to be able to, as an industry, deliver the requirements to, you know, the Build Back Better that the guys have talked about.
Thanks very much, Rob. Moving along, we have another question which ties together sort of net zero initiatives and also the business of trying to get visibility, a pipeline of what's coming in the future. Tim, I don't know if maybe you can have a view on this. Is it easy to get a view of what's coming through the frameworks once you're on them? Is it easy to see which frameworks are coming along that you might want to be bidding for?
I think it varies massively, to be honest. Yeah. You know, there's some things which are open, frameworks which are open every single month. There's some things where they'll publish a really clear program of what's coming down the line. Others will be much more responsive works. And I know Martin and a lot of his team have done some really good work to pull together a pipeline, but I'll let Martin explain a little bit more about that. In terms of frameworks, though, I think for us it's probably more challenging than a direct contract, because when you've got a direct 3-year contract, you know when that's due to expire, and we can publish that sort of information. But I think I would probably pass over in Martin's direction for that one.
Yeah, okay, thanks for that, Tim. Yes, very much so. Pipeline is an important piece of work that we've been doing over the last few years, because what we want is government departments to say what projects are coming up. I'll keep this to the construction sector. So, for instance, if the Department of Education is going to build 10 schools next year, we actually set out when they are, what areas we're looking at, etc., etc. That then gives the construction industry, an opportunity to look at what's coming up, but also to think more about whether they're going to pitch for those particular works. And I think, as highlighted, there are a lot of challenges in the construction industry, and it's easy for us to say that we're going to spend 660 billion, but actually that's going to be quite challenging. But again, if we are in a situation where we can publish our pipeline for the next 5 years, at the moment it's only 18 months, but it will be 5 years, then it will give the construction sector a reasonable amount of confidence about what's coming up in the future.
Thanks, Martin. John, I suspect you want to talk about a similar topic.
Yes, please, Lem. Yeah, there was 2 points really. One, the IPA have worked really hard. Infrastructure Projects Authority have worked really hard in this space as well, and have recently published the infrastructure pipeline. I think in quick succession. I think this is the second version. So they do work really hard with the departments in trying to get a visible pipeline, and as do we at Crown Commercial Service. So we work very closely with our public sector clients and publish a pipeline every 2 weeks, and we've had such good feedback from the suppliers on this, and when you're trying to do it, I absolutely understand the reasons why, but you also wondering at the same time how helpful this really is, because it can change every 2 weeks. Is it too frequent? But actually the feedback's been really, really positive. And whilst some projects may slip and change in terms of scheduled dates, actually what it does do, in addition to the supply chain and pipeline, it just gives them earlier visibility and the ability to plan from a bidding resource perspective. So, you know, having worked for contractors in the past, it really, really does help with bidding resource, because there's nothing worse than having a bid land that you're not aware of at the 11th hour with a prompt return date. So, you know, as I say, even if dates do slip, there's just a gratitude from the suppliers that actually they're seeing there's an opportunity there and they can track it.
And when you publish a pipeline like that, does it make it clear what mechanism you're going to use to procure those particular things that are on the pipeline, or does that get filled in as they get closer?
So it depends on what stage the project's up to. So it might be that we have strategic conversations with our customers who have committed to using one of our agreements, and they're happy to publish that at that stage on the pipeline. But that might be literally an indication of a project in 18 months' time worth an indicative value. But the further it gets down its sort of schedule, if you like, then the more detail starts to produce, and at that point we can start to share whether it is going to be a two-stage D&B or whether it is going to be an NEC over a JCT, etc. So it does depend on where the project's at in its lifetime.
Thanks, John. Again, moving on to another question, there's an observation that when obviously frameworks repeat, they renew after a period of time after they've expired. And a question about how to break into them, really, if there's a lot of contractors on a framework with experience, how do you get in and join them? Jason, perhaps from your perspective, you might have a view on whether or not that's a fair criticism of frameworks, that they sort of go around in cycles and the same contractors get on them.
I'm not sure. Not from my experience. I think you do get some common ones that will rejoin again, but we look at every procurement process individually by themselves on their own merits. Our evaluation process is completely away from ourselves. It's done by a third party. So we remain completely independent from that procurement process. So we're not influenced by any organisations that are on there currently. And then likewise, the evaluators, the third-party evaluators, they don't know who's on the framework, and they're not influenced by any contractors that are on there. So I suppose the only way to get on is again, going back to that simple answer of, answering the question that's being asked, understanding what's in the scope of the framework agreement and marrying it together. When you're answering the question, just say, this is how we're going to deliver it, and then always refer back to what's in the tender documentation to get into the framework agreement. So I think to break into it, I think is very simple. There are professional organisations out there as well that you can engage with that will help you win tenders and get onto the framework as well, so you can actually engage with those. So particularly for some of the smaller organisations is that tender writing process and really being focused on the question that's being asked. So yeah, to break the mold, I think it's quite a simple one. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, no problem. John.
Yeah, thanks, Lem. I think if I can tackle that in a slightly different way, I guess my honest response is, once a framework is live, then it can't be broken into. So if it's for a fixed term, 4 years, 5 years, whatever it may be, and that's probably a drawback of frameworks. However, having said that, part of the reason why organisations produce and procure frameworks is to provide that longevity. So where we're looking forward, as an example, to try and build those relationships on a longer term basis for clients should help deliver in a collaborative way far more outcomes than perhaps what they've previously been able to. I do know that the new procurement regs that are going through Parliament at the moment are looking to tweak those slightly, and I'm not close to any detail on this, but I am aware that there's different, I can't even think of the names of them now, but there's different models to frameworks, whether that's a fixed or a flexible framework. But the idea being that there might be a shortened period of a particular framework life, which has a break in it, and then allows other bidders to come in at that point. So I guess for all the viewers and the listeners, I guess listen out to that and have a read and understand what the implications of those are, and how you can position yourselves in the best way to break onto a framework at the right time, but also look at those types of new rules that are coming into play as well.
Thanks, John. Tim. You're on mute at the moment, Tim.
I knew we couldn't get through a full live video about someone saying that. That to be me. Just following on from something Jason said about the independent marking there, and do you see the same names coming up again and again? I think, from my experience, that actually companies who are sometimes on these frameworks get a bit complacent. And when it comes to a renewal, they will submit something which assumes prior knowledge. And as we know, the tender process is you must assume no prior knowledge. You can't win a new contract based on what you've done unless you put it down in writing, you put it down on paper. So we see that, especially with people that are newer to the procurement space, is they'll assume that, oh, we've done a great job, we'll win it again. Well, actually, if you don't write the best bid, you won't win it again.
Yes, so it comes back to those observations we made right at the start of the discussion about making sure that you answer the question and that you that's the best way to maximise your chances of success, I suppose. So, I'm conscious of the time. I think at that point it's probably a suitable point to draw our debate to a close. We still have a significant number of people who joined us at the top of the hour still with us, so I hope that our discussion has been useful. Very grateful to our panelists, to Rob, Jason, Tim, John and Martin for sharing their expertise. Very grateful also to OPPORTUNI for sponsoring today's webinar. Thank you very much for everyone who's been watching. Thank you very much for your interesting questions. I hope you found today's webinar useful. But from Construction News and from me, thank you very much for watching and goodbye.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Cheers now.
Bye.